Hi guys, Kuro here. So, I finally got Kafka. Yay. Since I've been saving for her from the very beginning, I didn't think twice about pulling for her. And I have to say, she was well worth it for me. However, if you're a new player who's looking for a character to build around, or if you're someone at TL40 hoarding Stellar Jades looking to see if she's worth spending on, here are my considerations on whether or not Kafka's worth pulling for you. But before we begin, I just want to point out that I won't be talking about Kafka from the perspective of an endgame player because frankly, I'm just not there yet. However, there are many great content creators and theory crafters out there who have covered Kafka from an endgame perspective. So you can look into them if that's what you're looking for. Now then, the first consideration I'd like to talk about is Kafka's kit. Her kit basically revolves around applying damage over time, or DOTs, on enemies and triggering them for extra damage. However, make no mistake, even if you don't fully utilize her DOT aspect, she's still a great damage dealer. Looking at her abilities, while her basic attack is pretty standard, her skill is her bread and butter. It allows you to trigger all DOTs on the target, so you'll want to spam her skill to maximize her damage potential. Her skill is the reason why you want a DOT team around her. But that doesn't mean she can't apply DOTs herself. Her talent lets her do a follow-up attack when an ally does a basic attack, which applies shock to the enemy. Then, her technique applies shock to all enemies, so it's a great way to start a fight. Also, her ultimate applies shock as well. It also deals very good damage, and with her Ascension 2 trace, you can also trigger all DOTs on the target, and not just her shock. Overall, I think her kit is very fun. The animations are great, and the mechanics are interesting. Now, the question is Kafka worth getting for her kit? In my personal opinion, I think so. If you lean on her DOT aspect, it's really fun to plan out how you're gonna apply as much DOTs as you can, and it's personally satisfying watching all of them trigger and do a ton of damage. However, if you don't like DOTs, or you just don't want to build DOT characters to complement her, she's still capable of doing great damage with the right build. Speaking of builds, the second consideration will be what stats to build on her. In the early to mid game, you'll have limited access to good relics, and this is why I believe it's a big consideration when deciding if you're gonna get her. The best thing about Kafka is that if you're going for a DOT build, you can just straight up stack attack on her. DOTs don't scale with crit stats, so they're not a priority. Speed and effect hit rate would be the more important secondary stats. Now, if you dislike DOTs or don't want to build a DOT team, I've heard you can also build her crit. I haven't tried it yet, but from what I've seen, it seems capable of doing great damage without relying on DOTs, which is a testament to the strength of Kafka's kit. So to summarize, between attack and crit, attack is easier to build since attack relics are easier to find, but works best with a DOT team to maximize Kafka's damage potential. On the other hand, crit turns Kafka into a straight damage dealer without relying on DOTs. However, it's harder to build because getting crit rate or crit damage relics is a pretty rough process. Additionally, she doesn't get crit from her traces. Building Kafka pretty much comes down to your own situation and preference. It's either you spend resources on building a good DOT team for her, or you'd rather spend it farming for the best crit relics for her. However, the fact that you can build her up with just straight attack makes her really beginner friendly, so that's something to consider. Also, final note on this topic, regarding Eidolons, at E0, a crit build on Kafka can work if you're not willing to invest in a DOT team. However, if you manage to get her to E2, you're gonna want to invest in a DOT team because she will amp up your team's DOTs just by existing. Now, on to the next one. The third consideration I want to talk about are light cones and whether or not you have easy access to a good one. This is important because having a good light cone for her will really help maximize her strength. Let's start with her signature light cone. Patience is all you need. It's a really, really good light cone, not just on her, but in general. You get additional damage, speed, and it applies a DOT that Kafka can trigger. Personally, I don't suggest pulling for just a light cone, but if you're going all in on Kafka, I think it might be worth giving it a shot since it really synergizes well with her. After that, I particularly like Fermata because, well, Kafka's on it. Well, seriously though, the break effect and extra damage on shocked enemies is great. Plus, you can get Fermata to Superimposition 5 as an F2P player via the Forgotten Hall shop. Then there's Good Night and Sleep Well, which is also a great choice. Might be even better than Fermata. However, I like Fermata more mostly because we can get them to S5 without pulling. Now, Why are light cones important and whether or not you should get Kafka? Well, as with any character, a good light cone can draw out Kafka's full potential. And as you can see, we're not lacking options for her. If you can pull for it, patience is all you need, it's just the best. It really amplifies your damage output. But if you don't want to roll for it, you have good 4-star options, including for Mata, that you can get to S5 even as an F2P player. The fourth consideration is her character synergies. Once again, Kafka's full potential is unlocked when she can take advantage of multiple DOTs on the enemy. So naturally, she works well with other characters that can deal DOTs. Some characters that go well with her are Sampo, Luca, and Serval. These are her best sub-DPS options, especially Sampo. I don't like the guy, but his kit, especially his ult, which amplifies DOT damage, synergizes well with Kafka. For support, you have Asta, Pela, and Tingyun. Asta is my first choice since her skill gives attack buffs to all allies, and she can apply a burn DOT using her basic attack. One surprising synergy she has is with Silverwolf. Silverwolf doesn't apply DOTs, but her skill, which gives enemies a new weakness, makes Kafka dangerous against any enemy. So if you have a lot of characters that synergize well with Kafka, then it might be worth pulling for her, since that means you have all the pieces you need to build a good DOT team. And even if you don't want to go that route, you still have characters like Tingyun and Silverwolf that complement her well. The last consideration would be future-proofing. Of course, unless you're a whale, we only have a finite amount of stellar jades that we can farm in the game. So if you're F2P, I can understand the importance of future-proofing your account and getting a character that you can use for a long time. So the question is Kafka future-proof? Honestly, I don't know what the future holds, but I want you to consider this. Currently, there's only a handful of DOT characters in the game. It's a really underrepresented niche, and Kafka's pretty much the queen of DOTs now. DOT teams weren't popular before due to how slow it took to apply damage. But with the appearance of Kafka, any DOT team with her in it just accelerated their damage output. Now, imagine if one day we get a tank that applies DOTs, or a healer that applies DOTs. The more DOT characters that get released, the more Kafka's value will rise. You know what's even better? Even if you don't like DOTs, she can still be a great damage dealer all by herself. In conclusion, for a beginner or someone in the mid-game, is Kafka worth pulling? In my opinion, Kafka's a very versatile character, who's a great damage dealer in her own right, with a kit that she can use by herself, but who shines the best when surrounded by DOT teammates. If you're just starting out in the game, I believe Kafka's a great character to build your main team around, particularly a DOT team. Also, in my opinion, she's pretty future-proof when you consider that the more DOT characters get released, the better she becomes. Now, if you're a player in the mid-game, I believe she's still worth pulling for since you have the option to go attack or crit on her depending on your playstyle. She can hold her own with her excellent damage if you go crit on her, but it's actually easier to build her DOT since you'll mainly want to stack attack on her. But with all that being said, if you like Kafka as a character, then go ahead and pull for her if you want to, and not just for what she can do now, or what she can do in the future. Well, that's all for now. I hope I gave you guys some good considerations to think about as you decide whether to pull for Kafka or not. And if you decide to pull for her, I wish you all the best. Please like and subscribe. I'm out.